Hi everybody. So in this video, I'm going to talk a little bit about Henrik Ibsen's play A Doll's House. And this video, we're going to talk a little bit about Act 1 and introduce some of the main characters, talk a little bit about characterization. And then we're also going to use Freytag's pyramid to sort of understand the plot structure of this play. So it is a three-act play. And in the first act, we get some exposition. We learn a little bit about those characters, the background information that's necessary for us as readers, audience, to know, what these characters' lives are like. And then we also get an inciting incident or the complication. So what sets up the main character's growth. In this case, our main character protagonist is Nora Helmer. And so we see her journey over the course of the play. And the inciting incident, as I'll talk about in this moment or in this video, will be learning about her debt to Krogstad, who she's taken this loan from, and then having Krogstad blackmail her. So the action of the plot is sort of rising based off of this information that Krogstad is now blackmailing her, and she is going to do everything she can to prevent her husband from finding out that she is in debt to Krogstad, and Krogstad is also, an enemy of the family, or an enemy of her husband's. So that's kind of our basic premise. So let's take a closer look at these main characters. Okay, so our main characters are listed here. So Torvald Helmer is Nora's husband. Sometimes he's referred to as Helmer. His first name is Torvald. Nora is his wife, so Nora Helmer is her full name. And their best friend in life is Dr. Rank. He seems to be a neighbor, and he comes and visits Torvald, and he's also a close confidant of Nora. She tells him and talks to him they have quite a sort of close, almost intimate connection. Mrs. Lind, or Christine Lind, will appear as a character. So she's an old friend of Nora's, back when they were young women, back in their school age. They went to school together, and then their lives took very different paths. And Christine comes back in the picture, and she shows up because she needs a little bit of a favor to ask of Nora and Torvald, because she's kind of in a difficult financial situation herself. We have the antagonist, Niles Krogstad, usually just referred to as Krogstad. And we learn a little bit about him. He works with Torvald at the bank, but he has a bad reputation. He's done some shady business in his past. He got in trouble for forgery, and he's also giving loans. So he's a bit of a loan shark. So instead of going to the bank where you would normally get a loan, sometimes you do a private loan from somebody like Krogstad, who sort of is dealing under the table, unofficially, giving people loans and putting interest on it and making money off of other people who are desperate for money. Helmer and Nora have 3 young children. There's also the nurse, who we learn takes care of the children most of the time. She's kind of like a nanny. So they would have called that a nurse, but it's more of a nanny role. And she was also, as we find out, Nora's nanny. So Nora grew up without a mother. So just her father raised her, and then the nanny, Anne, also took care of Nora throughout her childhood and as a young woman. And then she became Nora's nurse to her 3 children. There's also other minor, little tiny bit parts. The maid, the porter, who delivers the packages right at the beginning of the play. But again, most of the action of the play will take place within the household. And that's an important part of the setting as well. So we're set in the country of Norway, and it's in the 1800s, 19th century, at a time when there were, traditional gender roles in place. And women in Norway were confined to strict gender roles, both men and women. Men were expected to be the breadwinner of the family. They were the patriarchal head of household. They would make the rules, and women and children were expected to obey the father's rules, right? The husband's rules of the male head of household. Women were expected to, again, take on the domestic duties, oversee any household tasks. And in Nora's case, they're quite well off, like at least on the surface. They have staff that does a lot of the work. Like they have a maid that cleans the house. They have a nurse or nanny to take care of the children. So Nora's role is really to be a wife to her husband. She's a beautiful woman. She's still quite a young woman despite having 3 kids. She's, would be in her like late 20s, early 30s. So she's still, beautiful and young, and she is almost like a trophy wife in a way. Like she is there to entertain Torvald, be a beautiful object, and he takes pride in her beauty too. That's partly why they, the connection and romantic relationship that they have is largely based on, the physical part of Nora's beauty. Because intellectually they're not having a lot of serious conversations. They're not tackling the big issues together. Their connection is more, in a way, superficial, as we'll learn. And the first impressions of these characters, we get to see the interaction between husband and wife, Nora and Helmer, or Nora and Torvald, at the start of the play. So Act 1 just opens up. We learn it's right before Christmas. The Christmas tree has been delivered, and Nora has gone out and shopped for presents for the kids. And she gives change to the porter, so she's being generous with her money and tipping generously. She's also, as we'll notice in the stage directions, she takes a packet of macaroons from her pocket and eats 1 or 2. And this is like a subtle little detail, but she's, as we'll learn, hiding things from her husband. She lies to her husband, some little white lies, but then some big lies, as we'll see. And it's all to sort of maintain this facade that, she's the perfect wife, that she always does what Torvald tells her to do. She's completely obedient, and she's just perfect, right? That's the impression that a woman at this time and place in society was supposed to maintain, this aura as the perfect wife, mother to her family. So she has to kind of hide any kind of rebellion, any kind of, disobedience from her husband's rules, because she can't let him know that she's disobedient, because that would ruin his impression of her. And she wants to always, be the best wife that she can be to Torvald. So whenever he's in the room, she always, puts on this perfect wife persona. Okay, so when we see them interact, when Helmer comes out, he's going to come out of his room. He's the breadwinner, right? So he's always constantly working, and he's the one who, brings home the money and distributes it to Nora, and she buys for the household. So she'll buy clothing and toys and whatnot for Christmas presents. You'll notice the language that Torvald uses. He calls Nora a lot of little pet names and affectionate, cute little names for his wife. And on the surface, it is kind of, what an affectionate couple, lovey-dovey kind of couple might call each other pet names. So he has names like Little Lark, Little Squirrel, and other ones that he uses. And sometimes they're in a teasing way. Like sometimes he calls her Featherhead. Sometimes he calls her, I can't remember all of the little ones, but he'll use words like my little and my little squirrel, my little lark. Often they're animal names, larks, squirrels, skylarks, bird names, or little animals. And they tell us a little bit about his relationship with Nora. So on the surface, they're kind of fun and cute, but the reality is that it's kind of diminutive, like it's diminishing her as a person. And it's also giving us a hint that he thinks of her as my object, right? My possession, my wife, right? It's his property that he's announcing or referring to her as. And then the little part, again, it's like I said, it's diminutive. It makes her childlike, the way that, children are kind of our property or objects for some parents. They might be your little ones. But it is a way of sort of diminishing her as a woman and as a human being by calling her that. And then the animal names, birds will be there's lots of bird imagery in the play, in their language that they use. So birds will become a kind of symbolic motif that's used repeatedly, and it'll relate to Nora's journey and her sort of coming out of this cage, so to speak, by the end of the play. Just the way that a bird, learns to use its wings. So Nora will become sort of connected symbolically to birds. And then the squirrel thing is also kind of an interesting choice of animal. A squirrel hides its nuts and collects a bunch of things and stores them for the winter when it might need them later. So that kind of also relates to Nora's little secrets that she hides. She's always squirreling away money here and there that she can get her hands on. And then she's doing things with it behind the scenes, as we know, or as we'll learn. She has this loan that she's gotten from Krogstad, and she's been paying it back slowly by the money that Torvald gives her for monthly allowance. She only uses half of that. She pays back a little bit of her debt, and then tries to maintain the facade that, she's still buying clothes and groceries and all of these other things that she has to maintain in their household. So she's been scrimping and saving, despite the fact that on the surface they seem like a very well-to-do family and very wealthy. It still seems as if, they're struggling paycheck to paycheck in Nora's hands, because she has this debt that she's trying to repay back. So she's been squirreling away money, and she's also kind of sneaky. Her lies, right? Torvald asks her if she's bought anything, and he also has another name for her, my little spendthrift, which means she spends a lot of money. She's not thrifty. She spends freely. So that's kind of her reputation, is as a spendthrift, that she is very frivolous in her purchasing. She doesn't really know a lot about money management, and it just sort of slips through her fingers. She spends without thinking. And that's kind of, I guess, it could be a stereotype of women in a way. Like, that's a lot of stereotypical view of women, is that, they're not good at certain tasks like money management, or they're not good at finances, or they don't have, the intellect to make logical, rational decisions and manage money. So there is a bit of a stereotype there that she might be, or falling into, or that he's using to understand, or part of her reputation. But it also has some truth to it. Like, she has, She does take money from Torvald. He's the one who gives her money as a daily allowance, and it always seems like she can never get enough, right? It does seem like she's always asking him for money. And that's kind of the first impression we get, is that she's very money centric. Like she needs more and more money. And it's not that she's wasting it, but she's secretly paying back this loan that's been weighing on her and that only she knows about. So she hasn't been spending recklessly. She has actually been, scrimping and saving to pay back this loan that Torvald has no idea about. So on the surface, she seems very reckless with money, careless, but in reality, she's actually thrifty. She's trying to make ends meet, and also pay back this loan, but also maintain this facade that, everything is, that there's no struggles with finances in her household. So she's looking forward to the future because Torvald, it turns out, is getting this big promotion at the bank. He'll be paid more money. So money will be less of a worry for Nora. When she asks Torvald for money, she can ask for more money and then pay back this debt that she has that, again, he has no idea exists. So there is a bit of dramatic irony in the play, in the sense that we, as the audience, knows more about Nora's situation than Torvald does. He's kind of in the dark about Nora's loan, her secret loan that she's taken out, and that she owes money to Krogstad. And as it turns out, she's had to keep this secret because Torvald does not, he's got rules, and one of his rules is he doesn't like borrowing money. He thinks that looks poorly upon him as a man who's a breadwinner, to have his money, to have to rely on other people's money to support your family. And he says things like that. So Nora, says, I don't suppose I should care whether I owe money or not. And then Torvald says, that is like a woman, right? So he's, again, falling back on like sort of stereotypes of women not being very, not being known or being stereotyped as being very careless with money and having spending and like shopping and that kind of thing. But he says, but seriously, Nora, you know what I think about that. No debt, no borrowing. There can be no freedom or beauty about a home life that depends on borrowing and debt. So for him, as the breadwinner of the family, as the husband, it's his responsibility, according to gender norms of, Victorian times, to maintain, to be the financial head of household, right? So if he were to get loans and borrow money, it would imply something about his own masculinity, that he wasn't man enough to support his wife and children, and that he had to look to other men or money sources in order to do that. So it's kind of a stain on his reputation if he were to take loans and borrow. So he doesn't want to do that. And that's one of his rules: no debt, no borrowing. And Nora has broken this rule. And we learn more about that circumstance a little later in Act 1, but we know she does have this debt. And we learn that. But she comes across, first impressions, she asks him for more money. So our first impression of Nora is that she is very money-centric. She comes across as maybe a little manipulative. She tries to get her way by doing whatever Torvald asks her to do and sort of pretending to be this perfect wife. And it all kind of comes across as a little bit superficial. She comes across as also a little bit self-centered, and especially when in contrast to Christine Lind. When Christine Lind shows up, Nora's sort of bragging and talking about, all of her power and privilege that she'll have when Torvald gets his big bank promotion, and how happy and joyous her life is. And then she's not really paying attention to Christine's, being sensitive to Christine, who has struggled a lot in her life, being a widow, not having children, and struggling financially to make ends meet. So let's take a closer look at Christine Lind's role here. So Christine Lind is a foil character to Nora. She represents everything sort of in the opposite of what Nora is, and their lives, again, they were parallel. They grew up together as young women, but they, again, took very divergent paths, and they end up almost in opposite situations. Appearance-wise, Nora is still youthful and beautiful because she's had, somewhat of a privileged life as a sort of Torvald's wife. She's been taken care of. She doesn't have a lot of struggles or strains in terms of having to work for a living. So she's been able to maintain a sense of youthfulness. And she's also kind of childlike in just her demeanor. And then also how she's treated. Christine, on the other hand, it's noted how she looks much older than Nora. She has sort of more wrinkles. She looks a little bit more haggard, like she's gone through some tough times, that she's, seen and experienced hardship in her life. Other contrasts, so Nora is a married woman, and it seems as if she's in a very happy marriage based on love and trust and everything like that. We learn that Christine was once married, but it was an unhappy marriage, and that she actually did not love her husband. She's also now a widow, so her former husband died, and he left her basically struggling in poverty. Nora, on the other hand, has 3 children. Nora has 3 children, whereas Christine has no children at all. And also, like, economically, their lives have been very different. Nora, as I mentioned, is sort of part of this middle upper class, whereas Christine, as we've learned, has had to struggle with her husband's failed business, leaving her with debt. And her backstory is also that she's had to look after her sick mother and her 2 younger brothers. So she's had to actually go and work for a living. So only the lower classes of women at this time in history worked. So if you had to work, if you were in poverty, you took a job, any job that you could find as a woman. Most of women's jobs, again, paid very little. You could do, seamstress work, childcare, you could be a maid, that kind of thing. But again, you couldn't get, you're restricted in terms of the roles and jobs that you were allowed to do, basically. And if you were middle class woman, you weren't expected to work at all. And in fact, that would be a detriment to your reputation, your family's reputation. If you did work, it would be a slight to your husband if you worked, because it would make him seem as if he wasn't doing his job as the breadwinner. So Christine Lind comes across as very sort of independent. She travels to Nora and Torvald's home on her own. And basically she's looking for work, and she's heard that Torvald has gotten this promotion at the bank, and she's hoping that maybe with his new position of power, he might be able to hire her in some position, and she can, again, find work for herself. So she arrives on the scene, reconnecting with Nora, her old childhood friend, but also with her own self-interest in mind, that she needs a job, and she's hoping that Torvald will give her a job at the bank. But they come across as foil characters, right? Christine is the foil to Nora in the sense that they're very opposite. Christine is very serious, stern, independent. She's struggled a lot. And then Nora comes across as very childlike, naive in a way, and a little bit flighty and materialistic on the surface, at least. So in a sense, they they have contrary lives. And foil characters, again, just to define this term, it's any character that is used to draw attention to or contrast the main qualities of our protagonist. So some foil characters, the Betty and Veronica, as oppositions. Harry Potter and Draco Malfoy. So they have very contrasting characteristics. You might also say that Torvald and Krogstad are foils as well, so that might be something to also look into or think about, how they represent, at least on the surface. Torvald comes across as a very moral person, very righteous in his doing everything legally, and he's all about his morals and virtues. Krogstad comes across as more of a maybe morally corrupt person, and he has a bad reputation in the public's eye, and he comes across as kind of a bad guy, whereas Torvald maybe at the start seems more of a good guy. So we'll see how these get upset and how these roles sort of switch and change. But at least at the start, we have kind of foil characters set up. A little bit more exposition. So in Act 1, we learn a little bit of the backstory. So once Nora and Christine, Torvald and Dr. Rank go off to talk about, men's business in office or in Torvald's office, and then Christine and Nora seclude themselves and start talking a little bit about their lives and catch up. But we learn a little bit about the backstory of Nora and Torvald's early years of their marriage. And Nora wants to prove to Christine that she hasn't just lived a very privileged, pampered life, that she too has had to struggle in her life. And Nora tells the story that when she was early in their marriage, that Torvald had taken on all of these extra jobs, and he was really burnt out, exhausted to the point that it was making him very ill. And he was even on the, dangerously ill. The doctor said that, if he kept working at this pace, he might, have a heart attack or something like that. It sounded very dire. So the doctor said that they, as a family, that she needs to take her husband, or that her husband needs rest and relaxation. He needs a vacation. He needs to not work for a period of time to recover from this burnout exhaustion. That's, again, bringing him dangerously close to dying or something like that. So they, despite not having money because they're just newly married and he's just starting out in his business, they didn't have the money for this trip, but Nora believes, and the doctor tells her that it's absolutely necessary for them to go on this trip for Torvald to recover. So Nora is going to borrow the money to make sure that their family gets to go to this rest-filled vacation. So where did they get the money to go on this trip? That's one of the secrets that Nora has. She says, I couldn't ask my father because he was on his deathbed. And if I had told him that Torvald was deathly ill and sick, she thought it would hurt her father and that he might die if he heard that news. He also dies. Her father dies right around the same time. So she has an ailing father who's on his deathbed. She has an ailing husband who's very ill and needs a vacation. And then she's just a new mother as well. So she has a baby to also take care of. So you can imagine she's sort of pushed and pulled in different ways. And all of these stresses and strains that she had to live in this early part of their marriage. So she makes the decision to not tell her father, not tell Torvald, but to go and find a lender on her own to get the money. And she can't go to the bank as a woman and ask for a loan. She has to have a husband or father's guarantee or approval on the loan. So women at the time, there was restrictions. It was illegal for a woman to own property, and they couldn't get, a bank loan. They couldn't have a bank account of their own. So financially, they were very dependent on men. You had to either have a husband or father to authorize any financial arrangements that you could make as a woman. So it's part of the injustice of patriarchal society that women were limited in this way, and it affected lives, in significant ways to not be able to control money as a woman. But it's part of that stereotype that, they believe that women didn't have the rational mind to control their own money or make decisions in their lives. So they always needed a father or a husband to make those important decisions for them. So women were viewed as, the technical term in legal documents was incapable. So you would be mentally incapable as a woman to make these important decisions on your own. So Nora is kind of between a rock and a hard place. She doesn't really have many choices, but she decides that she's going to get this lender to give her the money, and she's going to forge her father's signature to get the loan. So instead of asking her father because he's ill, she can't do that. She doesn't want to do that. She doesn't want to bother him when he's sick and dying. And she can't tell Torvald because Torvald would never approve of her getting a loan. He has the rules against debt and borrowing, as we've seen. So he would never have approved that. So she does it on her own accord, and she thinks she's being very clever by forging her father's signature and getting the money. She thinks she's, being quite smart and clever. But in reality, she's crossed the line, the legalities of the times, the laws, and broken the law and become a criminal in a way because she's committed forgery of her father's name, right? So falsifying documents would be forgery, and that would have been something that you could go to jail for and get in trouble for. So she is not fully aware of the ramifications of her actions at this time because as a woman, again, she didn't have a lot of knowledge of the way the world works, but she makes this decision, and now in the present, she's going to have to suffer the consequences of this decision she made early on in her marriage. So that's kind of Nora's big secret, the big lie that she's been holding on to this whole time is that, everybody, including Torvald, believes that Nora's father gave them the money to go on this vacation to Italy when Torvald was ill, but the reality was Nora borrowed money to fund the trip from Krogstad, this kind of shady guy. And Nora believes that her actions saved Torvald's life, and in a way they did. He fully recovered after this trip and was able to go back to work after, and again, now he's getting a promotion. So on the surface, everything turned out well, but as we'll see with the inciting incident, Krogstad's back in the picture, and he's going to blackmail Nora. She keeps this secret from Torvald because, one, he has rules against lending and borrowing, right? Like we've said, he's very much against borrowing money. And he also says, or she thinks that, if she came forward and told him about the loan, that he would find it very humiliating and painful, that she as a woman was the one who got the money in that situation. Because as a man, it was his role and responsibility to provide financially for his family. So he doesn't like when women do men's work because it sort of makes him fall from his pedestal as a man. So Nora has to do things in secret. She has to keep this a secret from him. She also says she wants to save this information that she saved his life for a later time in their marriage when maybe she's lost some of her beauty, when he's no longer as enamored with her as he is now. So she's saving it for the future when she can tell him, when they're old and gray, that, hey, do you remember that time you were sick? I was the one who got the money. I saved your life. And then it will rekindle their love and appreciation for each other. So that's kind of like in her mind, her fantasy that she's playing out. But as we'll see in Act 3, this is not how Torvald is not grateful for Nora's actions. And, he doesn't understand what she's sacrificed in order to help him. But you might also, see Nora at fault here for not telling the truth to her husband, for lying this whole time. So it's they're both in a way complicated, or it's complicated by their gender roles, and the fact that Nora is hiding and trying to pretend everything is fine all the time and keeping secrets from her husband. But Torvald also has all of these strict rules and doesn't make it very easy for Nora to come and talk to him and tell him the truth either, because he's very controlling and wants everything to be perfect. So they can't really have this open, honest communication with each other because they're both trying to maintain this gender role perfection. The inciting incident of Act 1 is, again, Krogstad coming and blackmailing Nora. So he has heard that, Torvald is going to fire him, and he's actually going to hire Christine in his place. And he's very desperate to keep his job. He's, as we'll learn, has gone through many hardships in his life as well. But he's, at this point, an antagonist to Nora in that he's going to blackmail her, force her to try to get Torvald to keep, or let him keep his job. And if he doesn't, or if she doesn't do everything that Krogstad tells her to do, he has this information that he can hold over her, and he can reveal it at any time to her husband. So he's able to blackmail Nora, or else expose her, including exposing her as a criminal who has forged a signature, which would again bring shame to her name, but also to Torvald's name and their family name. And it would make her a criminal, and again tarnish all of this reputation that her husband has built up in his, power and privilege as this prestigious, very morally righteous person. So that's kind of our inciting incident, is this blackmailing situation, and then Nora becoming more and more desperate to try to keep the truth from her husband. So that's our inciting incident. And then the rising action of the play is kind of Nora's attempts to convince her husband to keep Krogstad in his job. And also Nora is sort of just struggling to keep things together, to keep her secrets hidden, and not have her life completely unravel. So the rising action kind of also follows her mental health decline. Her mental health, she will struggle with anxiety and depression, and will even have suicidal thoughts at certain points, trying to maintain this facade and this lie that she's desperately trying to keep her husband from finding out, because her whole life, her whole marriage, her whole family is dependent on this lie that cannot ever be exposed. So let's end the video for Act 1 there.